players to step in and make decisions, who runs him, who coaches him, and all these kinds of things. If you want to make all the decisions as an owner, then buy your own team.
Then buy your own team. Stephen A., talk to me.
I'm disappointed to hear what Dick Vermeil has to say. I understand where he's coming from because he's very, very old school. By all accounts, he's a good man. He's a champion. He's somebody to be respected. I know how loved he is in Philadelphia, but that's a very archaic point of view. And thank God he's not coaching in the NFL today, because with that kind of thinking, he would have been fired, because nobody would have wanted to play for a man who thinks like that. Let me be very, very clear. When Dick Vermeil says what we just played him saying, I would have had far more respect for what Dick Vermeil had to say if he would have brought up things about the Houston Texans. You talk about giving somebody a pass. You're so focused on Deshaun Watson and how he wants to make decisions or he wants to make moves, et cetera, and you're so dismissive of what he has to say in terms of, if you want to make all the decisions, then buy a team, knowing that it's a good old boys club. There's some African Americans out there with some dough that would love to put their resources together and own an NFL team. But guess what? You have to be allowed in. And they've allowed, to tell you what the NFL is all about, they've allowed some individual, Shad Khan from Pakistan, if I remember correctly, to own a team before they've allowed some African Americans to gain an ownership share, at least a significant majority ownership share in a franchise. So that's a different subject to be broached another day. But what I'm saying about Dick Vermeil is, how do you not bring up what led Deshaun Watson to this point? You highlighted how coming out of college, he didn't have this image. You highlighted what a good dude he was. We know how electrifying he was this year, led the league in passing with over 4,800 yards passing, averaging over 300 yards passing per game, completing over 70% of his passes, being an absolute stud outside of Patrick Mahomes. Can you definitively say there's somebody else with that talent and that youth that you would want more than Deshaun Watson? I mean, come on now. This man is going about the business of doing his job. And if you're the Texans, what did you do in return? You gave him his money, but essentially Dick Vermeil is ignoring all of the things that they did to alienate Deshaun Watson. The moves that Bill O'Brien and the Texans made, the fact that they didn't take him into consideration. And it's not about his emotions. It's not just about that. It's about the fact that he's looking at an organization that appears to be incredibly dysfunctional. So much so that you had coaches out there that didn't want the job, which is why they had to go and give it to a man who's 65 years of age, black, and oh, by the way, was in the league for 27 years and couldn't get a damn job as a head coach. But suddenly he's your new head coach in Houston. That's the route that they had to go. No disrespect to Mr. David Culley, because I'm wishing him nothing but the best. But the bottom line is that's the route you had to go, because other qualified candidates that had better reputations didn't even want the job. Dick Vermeil brings none of that up. He just goes the route of looking at the player and saying, excuse me, you know what? Essentially, shut up and play. We've heard this before. We didn't hear it when Brett Favre retired. He was threatening to retire on numerous occasions, holding the Green Bay Packers hostage, then retired and then unretired because he wanted to get traded, and ended up getting traded to the Jets because he really wanted to stay in the NFC North and they wouldn't oblige. So he went to the Jets for a year before ending up in Minnesota. We didn't hear anything then. We didn't hear anything when Carson Wentz essentially did the same damn thing to the Cincinnati Bengals. But Deshaun Watson does it. And now all hell's breaking loose and everybody's talking about how he's out of pocket. I wonder why that is. I don't know. I can guess, but I won't. I just wish that Dick Vermeil was a bit more expansive with his comments, as well as I wish Brett Favre was too.
Stephen A., as you might say, let me put it more direct than you and take it to that place. Let's be honest about what's happening with Deshaun Watson. Look, the organization is a mess. It's dysfunctional. Bill O'Brien pulled a move with DeAndre Hopkins that obviously would enrage anyone who ever lived in Deshaun Watson's position. And Deshaun Watson is someone who's ever lived. So he's enraged, too, by it, I'm sure. And then the proof is in the pudding. He balled out of control, and the team still was awful, right? So we understand it's dysfunctional. But, Stephen A., is it just about dysfunction? Or do you suspect, as I do, as many people do, that Deshaun Watson has a problem with McNair, with Cal McNair, right? He has I don't think he thinks his heart is in the right place because of his politics and who he supports and what they stand for, because of the track record in the organization. He hires, as was reported, for hundreds of thousands of dollars, a consulting firm who go get us the best people. And when the best people come back, and Stephen A., they ain't white, they go in a different direction, don't they? Let's be honest, that's part of what's going on here. So sure. I think it is insensitive for Dick Vermeil to ignore it. But I want to read you something that I found this, after Dick Vermeil made his comments today from PennLive.com. It's an interview with Dick Vermeil. Okay, you ready for this?
Yeah.
Did race relations occur to him as part of his job at Stanford? Quote, "It was on our minds at Stanford in the mid-'60s. There was starting to be a revolt with black athletes, especially the track athletes. How did he treat it? Well, I was young and didn't know what I know now. I was probably a little critical, thinking the scholarship athletes should be a little more appreciative of their opportunity and express it that way. But remember, I'm 83 years old, so I grew into our society as it is today, starting way behind where they are today." Because Dick Vermeil talked about his background and the prejudices that he grew up, that were around him as he grew up, and what he had to learn as an adult. And I would like to give him the benefit of the doubt here and think that the learning process is still occurring for him, as it should for all of us, as things change around us. And he is not being sensitive enough, and maybe he can be sensitized to what, in fact, is the issue with Deshaun Watson. Well, I don't think it's merely for him labor issue versus management, stay in your place. I think he needs to be sensitized to the undercurrent of this issue, the racial component of this issue with Deshaun Watson and the Texans.
Well, first of all, Max, let me completely applaud you for what you brought up, because that was great information that you provided. So thank you for giving me and this audience that. I'm dead serious about that. I really appreciate that. But I would beg to differ with your conclusion, because I think the very facts that you just presented really eradicates the notion of him needing to be a bit more sensitized. If you've acknowledged what you were in the 60s and how you had to grow with the times to elevate your level of appreciation for what was going on, what disenfranchised people from disenfranchised communities had to endure, et cetera, et cetera.
No.
How the hell do you forget that in the year 2020 to say what he said about Deshaun Watson?
My point.
He sounds like the same guy is what I'm trying to say.
I appreciate
I'm not saying you're
that.
saying it. I'm saying he sounds like the same guy that he described in the 60s.
I appreciate what you're saying, but here's the distinction I'm making, Stephen A. There are overlapping issues here. There's the labor issue versus ownership, right? Hey, stay in your place labor. Right. And there's the overlapping issue that oftentimes in the NFL, labor is black and ownership is white. I think Dick Vermeil is focused on the labor stay in your place issue, and maybe, I'm hoping, not sensitized enough to the racial component of it. Now, if he has taken that into account too and still says what he says, then Dick Vermeil, I disagree with, and I have a problem with what he said.
Hold on,
right,
I know we got to go, Molly.
I hate to cut off a serious conversation like this, but we got a guest waiting for us with the hard window, so we got to go. We can continue this later. You can give final thoughts. Bills Mafia, you can thank me later, because when we come back, the Bills are back, and our next guest, Stephon